Hi, my name is Cassandra Champagne. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Michigan, and today we are going to be doing the standard Proctor compaction test. I have my safety glasses on before we get started, and I'm also going to be referring to the lab manual throughout this test, and I encourage you to follow along. First, we're just going to go over the equipment. First, we have our Proctor mold. This is 3 pieces. So here we have this top part, which is called the collar. This is the actual mold itself, and then we have this base plate with these rods on the side that allow us to twist the pieces of the mold and hold them in place, just like that. We also have our rammer, which is how we're going to be compacting the soil into the mold. So basically the weight you can see sticking out the bottom down here can pull up and be released from a set height. Okay. We also have a scoop to be able to help us mix and transfer our soil. We have some knives and a straight edge, which we'll get to later. We also have 2 moisture content tins that we're going to need with lids. We have our soil. We've already pre-weighed about 5 pounds of our soil. And then we have some water, which we've also pre-measured the appropriate amount of water to achieve our desired moisture content. Typically, when doing a test like this, you would do this repeatedly at different moisture contents to be able to achieve the compaction curve that we're after. We're just going to show one today at one specific moisture content. However, the procedure is exactly the same. You would just use varying amounts of water for the other tests. Okay, and with that, I think we are ready to get started. We also have a scale, as usual. So we're going to get started by mixing our water into our soil and making sure it's well mixed. We want to make sure that we really make sure that we get to a homogeneous mixture. That way we don't have any pockets of wetter or drier material. We want to have a consistent moisture content throughout the entire test. You may also notice while doing this, and you can kind of see, you're going to start off with some pretty large clumps, and we want to mix until these clumps are small to about the size of about a pea, and that's how we know that we'll be ready to start once our moisture is consistent and those clumps have gotten smaller. It's also one of those labs you might get your hands a bit dirty. Want to make sure you're scraping the sides of the bowl. Water and dry soil can tend to accumulate there. Want to make sure we're mixing everything thoroughly. You can start to see some of these smaller pieces. That's what we're looking for, but I still do have some larger clumps I'm trying to work through. Okay, so this looks pretty good. The last thing that we need to do before we get started is to weigh the mold before we add any soil to it. So we're going to come over to our scale, and then we don't want to weigh the collar, so we just want to make sure we're weighing the mold itself and the base plate. We're going to record this on our data sheet. Okay, and now we can put the collar back on, and we're just going to use these wing nuts to secure the mold and the collar to the base plate. Then we'll be ready to start adding soil. I want to make sure we have a nice snug fit. There we go. All right, and we're ready to get started. All right, so you can see from our soil that the clumps are approximately the size of peas, so that is ready to go. We've also weighed and assembled our Proctor mold, so now we're ready to start filling. We're going to fill the soil into the mold in 3 lifts, In the first lift, we are going to fill to about 2/3 of the way up to the top of the mold, not the collar, but about 2/3 of the way up the bottom portion of the mold. So we're going to get started just scooping the soil in. A little bit more. I think one more scoop and we should be good. Okay. All right, that looks good to me. So I filled it out to about that much. Now we're ready to actually compact this lift with the rammer. And then just to let you know, there is a pattern that we're supposed to follow with the rammer. So looking into the mold, the pattern we're supposed to follow is to apply the rammer here, 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 and then on the diagonals here, 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 and here. We're going to do that 25 times. So I'm going to count out loud so we know when we're all done. All right. So let's get started. We do want to make sure that it is this part of the rammer here that is in contact with our soil before we drop the weight. That way this part is actually penetrating the soil to perform the compaction. So we're going to start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. All right. So that is our first lift now compacted into our mold. So now we are going to fill the mold with more soil up to about this, the interface between the mold and the collar. You can see that the soil really does compact quite a bit because of how much air there is, and that's why we're trying to get the soil at the beginning to a pea size. That way there's not too much air in between. But here we go. So now we filled to about this line here. We're ready to compact again. One thing that I want to mention with the hammer is every time I'm dropping, I'm making sure to lift the weight all the way up to the top. That way, up to the top of this part here. That way we can make sure it is falling this entire distance because that's our standard compaction effort. So we're going to go ahead and do another 25. 1, 24, 25. Okay, so now we are ready for our third and final layer of soil. Our ultimate goal here is to have compacted soil filling up the entire mold portion and then a little bit higher. That way we can trim to the exact volume that we need. So that's the whole purpose of this collar. We're going to fill soil to the very top. That way once we're done compacting and the height of the layer decreases, we still have enough soil in our mold. So we're going to get started filling this up for our last compaction layer. Get one more in here. Okay. All right. So now we're ready for our last compaction. Again, we're going to be applying 25 blows in the same pattern as before. 1, 24, 25. All right, so now we are done compacting and we can get started trimming our specimen to the mold size. Okay, so now we have our compacted soil in our mold, and the next step is going to be to remove this collar on top. However, we want to be very careful when we're doing this, because when we remove the collar, we don't want any of the soil to come with it, because we want to be very careful that we're not going to remove any of the soil that is in this bottom part of the mold. So what we're going to do is we can use either a spatula or a small knife just to try to go like this along the side of the inside of the mold to make sure that the clay isn't adhering to the collar itself. That way it won't get stuck when we try to remove it. When we are ready to remove the collar, we just have to unscrew these wing nuts on top and twist off. Just going to want to do it slowly. Make sure we don't remove any of the soil. So that looks pretty good. So you can see as I spin this around that on all sides we did compact our soil higher than the mold, which is what we're looking for. Okay, so the next step, we need the soil to be filling the exact volume of this bottom mold. So we have some knives and a straight edge to try to trim off the top of the soil so we have a nice flush surface on the top. So we're going to go in and get off some of this excess. Once we start getting close to the mold, we really want to be going in with the straight edge, so we're very sure that we're not going to cut into the actual mold itself. But we can get off some of these larger pieces. Okay. Sometimes the sides get in the way, so you just have to be a little careful and creative. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to go in with the straight edge. And this does have one side that's a little bit sharper. Just going to always make sure that each end of the mold is in contact with the straight edge, so I can't possibly be removing too much material. Kind of want to saw back and forth to get this material off. This is looking pretty good. Okay. So now we have a nice even surface on top of our mold. So we know that our soil is filling this exact volume. So now we just want to clean off any soil that might have made its way onto the mold or base plate, because the next step is going to be to weigh this. So we want to make sure that we're only weighing the mold and soil that's inside the mold, not any soil on the outside. Now we're going to come over to our scale, zero it out, and weigh the mold. Okay. The next step is going to be to take some samples from the top and from the bottom of the mold so that we can determine the moisture content. So that is what these moisture content tins are for. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh each of these moisture content tins and record their empty weight onto my data sheet. I have them labeled top and bottom so I don't get them confused, and I'm going to keep that straight on my data sheet as well. This one is for the top. And that one is for the bottom. We're going to be looking to get at least 20 grams of soil for our moisture content calculations. So we can go in really with a knife or a spatula to get a sample from the top and then a sample from the bottom. And the reason that we're doing this is because we could have some varying moisture between the top and the bottom, so we're going to end up taking an average of the two. So I'm going to take my tin labeled top. I'm going to grab a sample. And now I'm going to weigh this. And I'm going to put the cover on it until I'm ready to put it into the oven. That way we don't lose any moisture. Now I'm going to loosen the wing nuts here on the bottom so we can access the bottom of our sample. All right, so the bottom of the mold is hollow, as you can see here. We did lose a little bit of soil on the base plate, and this is the reason that we weighed the mold and the base plate together, because if we had only weighed the mold and we had lost some soil on the base plate, we would have had some error there. But we are going to take a sample from the bottom. We're going to weigh this. So now we would take both of these samples. Once we're ready to put them in the oven, we'll remove the cover, put them in the oven for about 24 hours, and then come back and record the dry weight. That way we can determine the moisture content of each sample. And that concludes our standard Proctor compaction test. Again, we would normally run this at multiple different moisture contents. That way we can generate our curve that we're really after. But again, the procedure would be the same exact thing. We would just use a different amount of water that we're adding to our soil. And that's it.